There are moments in life when this world around us suddenly feels incomplete, as if we are living inside a story whose ending we have forgotten. We go through our days performing the same rituals, following the same patterns, and yet somewhere beneath the surface a quiet question persists. Is this all there is? This feeling is not new. It is not a product of modern anxiety or technological distraction. It is ancient, woven into the fabric of human consciousness across cultures and centuries. Long before our time, people asked the same question and crafted myths, stories, and teachings as to explore it. Among those who pondered this mystery were a diverse group of thinkers and mystics who came to be known as Gnostics, and their writings offer one of the most haunting and poetic explorations of awakening, illusion, and the nature of reality itself. The word Gnosticism comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means knowledge. But this is not the kind of knowledge found in textbooks or lectures. It is not information that can be passed from teacher to student through words alone. Gnosis refers to a direct inner knowing, a kind of experiential insight that transforms the one who receives it. In Gnostic traditions, this knowledge is not about the outer world, but about the self, about the divine, and about the relationship between the two. It is the recognition of something hidden, something forgotten, something that has always been present but obscured by layers of distraction and illusion. This inner awakening, this remembering, lies at the heart of what Gnostic teachings describe. Gnosticism is not a single unified religion with a central doctrine or authority. It is more accurate to think of it as a collection of related movements, ideas, and texts that flourished in the early centuries of the Common Era, particularly in the regions around the Mediterranean. These movements emerged in a world rich with religious and philosophical diversity. Greek philosophy, Greek, Jewish mysticism, Christian theology, and Eastern thought all mingled in the cosmopolitan cities of the ancient world, and Gnostic ideas drew from this fertile cross-pollination. Some Gnostic groups identified themselves as Christians, interpreting the teachings of Jesus in ways that emphasized inner enlightenment and mystical union. Others drew heavily from Platonic philosophy, seeing the material world as a shadow of a higher, truer reality. Still others incorporated elements of Persian dualism, Egyptian religion, and Jewish apocalyptic literature. What united these varied traditions was a central conviction that the visible material world is not the ultimate reality, and that human beings carry within themselves a spark of the divine that has become trapped, forgotten, or obscured. For centuries, what we knew about Gnosticism came primarily from the writings of early Christian bishops and theologians who opposed Gnostic teachings. These church fathers, including Irenaeus, Tertullian, and Hippolytus, wrote refutations of Gnostic ideas, summarizing and critiquing them in order to defend what they considered orthodox Christianity. Their accounts painted Gnosticism as heretical, dangerous, and misleading. Because so many original Gnostic texts were lost or destroyed, scholars for a long time had to rely on these hostile summaries to understand what Gnostics actually believed. But in the mid-20th century, an extraordinary discovery changed everything. In December of 1945, near the town of Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt, a local farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman and his brothers were digging for fertilizer near a cliff face when they unearthed a sealed earthenware jar. Inside were 13 leather-bound codices containing more than 50 ancient texts written in Coptic, a late form of the Egyptian language. These texts had been hidden sometime in the 4th century, likely by monks who sought to preserve them from destruction during a period when certain Christian writings were being condemned and burned. The Nag Hammadi Library, as it came to be known, included a wealth of Gnostic scriptures, including Gospels, apocalypses, philosophical treatises, and mythological narratives. Among them were texts like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Apocryphon of John, and the Hypostasis of the Archons. For the first time in modern history, scholars could read Gnostic teachings in the words of their own adherents, rather than through the lens of their opponents. What these texts revealed was a rich, complex, and deeply symbolic worldview that sought to answer some of the most profound questions human beings can ask. Why does suffering exist? Why does the world feel broken? Why do we feel alienated from ourselves, from each other, and from the divine? And most importantly, how can we awaken from this condition and return to our true nature? The answers proposed by Gnostic texts are not simple or literal, they are mythological, poetic, and layered with meaning. They invite interpretation rather than demand belief. And at the centre of these myths stands a figure both tragic and terrifying, the Demiurge. In Gnostic cosmology, the Demiurge is not the ultimate god. He is not the source of all being, the infinite and unknowable divine that exists beyond all names and forms. Instead, the Demiurge is a secondary lesser deity, a creator, yes, but a flawed one. He is the architect of the material world, the one who fashioned the physical universe and the laws that govern it. But he did so in ignorance, without full knowledge of the true divine reality that exists beyond him. In many Gnostic texts, the Demiurge is described as arrogant, jealous, and controlling. He believes himself to be the only god, the highest power, and he demands worship and obedience from the beings he has created. He does not realize that he himself is a product of a deeper, truer source, and that the world he has made is a pale imitation of the true spiritual realm. The most well-known Gnostic account of the Demiurge's origin comes from the myth of Sophia, whose name means wisdom in Greek. In this myth, Sophia is one of the eons, divine emanations that flow from the ultimate source of all being, sometimes called the pleroma or the fullness. The aeons exist in a state of perfect unity, knowledge, and light. But Sophia, moved by a desire to know the unknowable, to reach toward the infinite without her divine counterpart, acts alone. This act of separation, of desire without balance, results in a disruption. From this disruption, a being is born outside the pleroma, a being formed from Sophia's passion and confusion. This being is the Demiurge. He is born in ignorance, unaware of the divine light from which his mother Sophia originated, and in his ignorance he begins to create. The Demiurge fashions the material cosmos, shaping matter and energy, forming stars and planets, creating the laws of physics and the structures of time. He creates bodies and installs within them something he does not fully understand, a divine spark, fragment of the light that Sophia herself carried. This spark, this inner light, is what makes human beings more than mere matter. It is the seed of divinity trapped within flesh, the eternal within the temporal, the conscious awareness that yearns to return to its source. But the Demiurge, in his arrogance and ignorance, does not want this spark to awaken. He does not want the beings he has created to remember who they truly are, because if they did, they would no longer be bound to him. They would no longer be subject to his control. To maintain his dominion, the Demiurge employs helpers, intermediaries, enforcers of the illusion. These are the archons, a term that means rulers or authorities. In Gnostic texts, the archons are described as cosmic powers that govern the material realm and the lower dimensions of existence. They are not necessarily evil in the way we might understand evil today, but they are deeply invested in maintaining the status quo. They perpetuate ignorance, forgetfulness, and attachment. They surround human consciousness with distractions, with fears, with desires that keep attention focused outward rather than inward. They uphold the structures of the material world and ensure that the divine spark remains dormant, unaware of its true nature. It is important to understand that in Gnostic thought, the material world itself is not evil. Matter is not inherently sinful or corrupt. The problem is not that the physical universe exists, but that it is mistaken for the ultimate reality. The Demiurge's creation is described as flawed, incomplete, and imitative. It is a copy of something higher, a shadow of the true spiritual reality. And the greatest danger is not living in this world, but forgetting that there is anything beyond it. The trap is not the body or the earth, but the belief that this is all there is, that the roles we play, the identities we construct, the fears and desires that drive us are the totality of who we are. This is what many Gnostic texts describe as the condition of forgetfulness or ignorance. Human beings, in this view, are not inherently flawed or sinful by nature. They are divine at their core, but they have forgotten. They have become so identified with the material world, with their bodies, their egos, their social roles, that they have lost touch with the inner spark. They live as if they are only what they appear to be, only what the world tells them they are. And in this state of forgetting, they remain bound to the cycles of suffering, fear, and illusion that characterize material existence. But Gnostic teachings do not end with this bleak diagnosis. The central message of Gnosis is that awakening is possible. The divine spark within can be rekindled. The veil of forgetfulness can be lifted. Through inner knowledge, through direct experience of the divine, a person can remember who they truly are and begin the journey of return to the pleroma, to the fullness of spiritual reality. This awakening is not about acquiring new information. It is about shedding false identities, releasing attachments, and recognizing the light that has always been present within. And yet, according to Gnostic myth and teaching, there is one final obstacle, one last trap that the Demiurge sets for those who begin to awaken. This is the theme we are exploring here, the Demiurge's last trap. It is the most subtle and insidious illusion of all, because it appears at the very threshold of awakening itself. It is the trap of the ego masquerading as enlightenment, the trap of false transcendence, the trap of mistaking a new identity for true freedom. To understand this final trap, we must first understand what the ego is, in both psychological and spiritual terms. The ego is the constructed sense of self that we build over the course of our lives. It is the I that we refer to when we talk about ourselves, the collection of memories, beliefs, preferences, fears, and desires that make up our personality. The ego is not inherently bad or wrong. It serves a function. It helps us navigate the world, make decisions, protect ourselves, and relate to others. But the ego is also limited. It is a construct, a narrative we tell ourselves about who we are. And because it is constructed, it is inherently fragile. It requires constant maintenance, constant validation, constant defense. In Gnostic terms, the ego can be understood as one of the primary mechanisms by which the Demiurge keeps the divine spark imprisoned. The ego is the voice that says, I am this body, I am this name, I am this role, I am this story. It is the identification with the material, the temporal, the conditioned. And as long as we believe that the ego is who we truly are, we remain trapped in the illusion. We remain subject to fear, because the ego is always under threat. We remain driven by desire, because the ego is never satisfied. We remain caught in cycles of judgment, comparison, and separation, because the ego defines itself in the opposition to others. The journey of awakening in many spiritual traditions, including Gnosticism, involves seeing through the illusions of the ego. It involves recognizing that the ego is not the true self, but a mask, a persona, a temporary construction. This recognition is liberating. It opens the door to a deeper sense of identity, to the realization that we are not merely the sum of our thoughts and experiences, but something vaster, something timeless, something connected to the divine source itself. But here is where the final trap appears. As we begin to awaken, as we start to see through the illusions of the material world and the limitations of the ego, a new and more subtle form of illusion can arise. The ego, sensing its own dissolution, does not simply surrender. It adapts. It transforms. It creates a new identity, a spiritual identity that can be just as confining as the old one. This is what some teachers call the spiritual ego, the sense of being enlightened, awakened, special, or superior to others who are still asleep. It is the trap of believing that we have transcended the illusion, when in fact we have only traded one illusion for another. This final trap can take many forms. It can appear as the belief that we have achieved permanent enlightenment and no longer need to question ourselves or grow. It can appear as judgment toward others who do not share our insights or our path. It can appear as attachment to spiritual experiences, to states of bliss or clarity that we mistake for the ultimate goal. It can appear as the conviction that we have escaped the material world and no longer need to engage with it compassionately or responsibly. In all these forms, the trap is the same. The ego has not been transcended, but has instead been dressed in new clothes. The Demiurge, in a sense, has not been defeated, but has simply changed his disguise. Gnostic texts, though ancient and mythological in their language, point toward this danger in subtle ways. They warn that the archons are cunning, that they can imitate the light, that they can create false visions and deceptive experiences. They describe tests and trials that the soul must face on its journey upward through the spheres of the archons, each one a challenge to discern the true from the false, the real from the imitation. In psychological terms, these tests can be understood as the challenge of seeing through our own self-deceptions, our own need to hold on to identity and control even as we seek liberation. One of the key insights in Gnostic thought is that the ultimate divine reality, the true God beyond the Demiurge, is beyond all names, all concepts, all images. It is ineffable, unknowable in the way we normally know things. Any attempt to capture it in words or ideas is necessarily incomplete. This means that even our spiritual beliefs, our theological concepts, our maps of reality, are themselves limited and provisional. They are fingers pointing at the moon, not the moon itself. And if we cling to these maps as if they were the territory, If we become attached to our spiritual ideas and identities, we have fallen into the final trap. The Gnostic teaching of awakening, then, is not about arriving at a final destination where we can rest in certainty and superiority. It is about an ongoing process of discernment, humility, and surrender. It is about continually letting go of what we think we know, continually releasing our attachment to identity, continually opening ourselves to the mystery that lies beyond all forms. The divine spark within does not awaken once and for all in a single dramatic moment, though such moments may occur. Rather, awakening is a deepening, a remembering that unfolds gradually, layer by layer, as we release the veils of illusion and ego that obscure our true nature. This perspective resonates with many other spiritual and philosophical traditions, both ancient and modern. In Buddhist teaching, for example, there is a recognition that attachment to the idea of enlightenment can itself be an obstacle. The Zen tradition speaks of killing the Buddha, meaning that even the image or concept of the enlightened one must be released if true freedom is to be found. In the mystical traditions of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, there are teachings about the dark night of the soul, a stage in which all comforting images and concepts of God are stripped away, leaving the seeker in a state of emptiness and unknowing that paradoxically opens the door to deeper union with the divine. In modern psychology, particularly under the work of Carl Jung, there is a parallel exploration of the shadow and the persona. Jung recognized that the self we present to the world, and even the self we present to ourselves, is often a mask that hides deeper unconscious aspects of our psyche. The process of individuation, as Jung called it, involves integrating these hidden aspects, acknowledging the parts of ourselves we have denied or repressed, and moving toward a more authentic and whole sense of being. This process too involves a kind of death and rebirth, a letting go of false identities in order to discover who we truly are. The Gnostic myth of the Demiurge and the Archons, when read symbolically, can be understood as a map of this inner landscape. The Demiurge represents the forces within and around us that create and maintain the illusion of separateness, the belief that we are isolated, limited, material beings with no connection to the divine. The Archons represent the specific patterns, habits, fears, and desires that keep this illusion in place. And the journey of the soul through the spheres of the Archons represents the process of confronting and transcending these patterns, one by one, in order to return to the source. But the final Archon, the last gatekeeper, is the subtlest of all. It is the part of us that wants to claim ownership of the awakening itself. It is the voice that says, "I have awakened. I have seen through the illusion. I am free." This voice, though it may sound like the voice of truth, is still the voice of the ego. It is still the voice of separation, of identity, of the self-defined in opposition to others who are not awake. And as long as this voice remains, the journey is not complete. True awakening, in the deepest Gnostic sense, involves the dissolution of even this final claim. It involves the recognition that there is no separate I who awakens, but rather that awakening is a return to the unity that was always already present. The divine spark does not become divine. It remembers that it always was divine. The illusion does not disappear because we have conquered it, but because we have seen through it, and in seeing through it, it loses its power. This is a difficult teaching to hold because it challenges our deepest need for certainty, for control, for a stable sense of self. We live in a world that constantly reinforces the ego, that tells us we are valuable only insofar as we achieve, produce, and distinguish ourselves from others. The structures of society, the demands of work and family, the pressures of social media and consumer culture, all of these can be seen from a Gnostic perspective as archontic forces that keep us focused outward, that distract us from the inner work of awakening. And even when we turn toward spirituality, toward meditation or prayer or philosophical inquiry, we bring with us the same patterns of striving, of comparison, of self-judgment. We try to achieve enlightenment the way we might try to achieve success in any other domain, and in doing so we miss the point entirely. The Gnostic texts themselves acknowledge this difficulty. They describe the journey of awakening as perilous, not because of external dangers, but because of the inner challenges of discernment and surrender. In the Apocryphon of John, for example, the soul must pass through the realms of the Archons, and at each gate it must speak certain words, certain formulas of recognition, in order to proceed. These formulas are not magical spells but symbolic expressions of understanding. They represent the soul's recognition of its own divine nature and its refusal to be bound by the false authorities of the archons. But this recognition must be genuine, not merely intellectual. It must come from a place of lived experience, not from memorized doctrine. This is why gnosis, in the Gnostic sense, cannot be taught in the ordinary way. It cannot be transmitted through books or lectures, though these can point the way. It cannot be given by a guru or a saviour, though teachers and guides can help illuminate the path. Gnosis must be discovered within, through direct experience, through the inner light that awakens when the veils of illusion are lifted. It is a process that is both deeply personal and paradoxically utterly transpersonal. It is personal because each individual must walk their own path, must confront their own illusions, must undergo their own transformation. And it is transpersonal because what is discovered in this process is not a unique, separate self, but a universal shared essence that connects all beings. In this light, the Gnostic teaching can be seen not as a rejection of the world or of life, but as an invitation to live more fully, more authentically, more awake. It is not about escaping the material realm, but about seeing it clearly, without the distortions of fear, desire, and false identity. It is not about transcending the body or the emotions, but about recognizing that we are more than the body, more than the emotions, more than the stories we tell about ourselves. And it is not about achieving some final state of perfection, but about embracing the ongoing process of growth, change, and deepening awareness. The idea of the Demiurge's last trap, then, is a cautionary teaching. It reminds us that the journey of awakening is never finished, that there is always another layer of illusion to see through, another attachment to release, another false identity to let go of. It warns us against complacency, against the temptation to rest in our spiritual achievements, against the danger of using our insights as a way to feel superior to others. And it invites us to approach the spiritual path with humility, with curiosity, with a willingness to be wrong, to not know, to remain open to the mystery. This humility is especially important in a time like ours when spiritual teachings from many traditions are widely available, when people are blending and synthesizing ideas from different sources, when the language of awakening and enlightenment has entered mainstream culture. There is a danger in this proliferation of spiritual ideas, a danger that the language of awakening can be co-opted by the very forces it is meant to help us see through. We can use spirituality as another form of consumerism, collecting experiences and credentials and identities. We can use it as another form of competition, measuring our progress against others, comparing our insights and realizations. We can use it as another form of escapism, turning away from the challenges and responsibilities of embodied, relational life in the name of pursuing some abstract ideal of enlightenment. The Gnostic tradition, with its emphasis on direct inner experience and its suspicion of external authorities, offers a corrective to these dangers. It reminds us that no teacher, no text, no tradition can awaken us. They can only point the way. The work must be done within, and the work is not about acquiring something new, but about releasing what is false, about stripping away the layers of conditioning and identification that obscure the light that is already present. At the same time, Gnostic teachings also remind us of the value of community, of shared inquiry, of dialogue with others who are walking the path. The early Gnostic communities were diverse and often contentious, but they shared a commitment to questioning, to exploring the mysteries, to supporting one another in the difficult work of inner transformation. They did not have a single orthodoxy or a rigid hierarchy. They valued individual insight and personal revelation, and they recognized that each person's journey is unique, that there is no single map that fits all seekers. This diversity and openness is one of the reasons why Gnostic teachings have continued to resonate across the centuries, even after the original communities disappeared. The themes of awakening, of seeing through illusion, of discovering the divine within, are universal. They appear in different forms in different cultures and times, but they point toward the same fundamental human experience. The sense that there is more to reality than meets the eye, that we are more than we seem, that the ultimate truth is not found in the outer world, but in the depths of our own being. In the centuries following the early Gnostic movements, these themes persisted in various forms. They appeared in the mystical traditions of medieval Christianity, in the writings of Meister Eckhart, Julian of Norwich, and John of the Cross. They appeared in the Islamic mysticism of Rumi and the Sufi poets, who spoke of the lover and the beloved, of the soul's journey to union with God, of the need to die to the false self in order to live in the true self. They appeared in the Jewish Kabbalah, with its intricate maps of the divine emanations and the process of tikkun, the repair and restoration of the world. They appeared in the Hermetic and alchemical traditions of the Renaissance, which used the language of chemistry and transformation as a metaphor for inner spiritual work. And they appeared in the philosophical idealism of thinkers like Plato, Plotinus, and later the German idealists who saw the material world as a manifestation or expression of a deeper spiritual reality. In the modern era, the rediscovery of the Nag Hammadi texts in the mid-20th century sparked renewed interest in Gnosticism and its relevance to contemporary life. Scholars, theologians, psychologists, and spiritual seekers began to explore the Gnostic worldview not as a historical curiosity, but as a living tradition with profound insights to offer. The psychologist Carl Jung was particularly influenced by Gnostic ideas, seeing in them a symbolic language for the process of psychological individuation and the integration of the unconscious. Jung believed that the Gnostic myths were expressions of universal patterns in the human psyche, archetypes that appeared across cultures and times. Other modern thinkers have drawn on Gnostic themes to critique contemporary culture and society. They have pointed out parallels between the Gnostic description of the archons and the impersonal systems and structures that shape our lives today, the economic systems that reduce people to consumers, the political systems that reduce citizens to voters, the technological systems that reduce human experience to data. From this perspective, the Demiurge can be seen as a symbol for the underlying logic of a world that treats people as means rather than ends, that values efficiency over meaning, that prioritizes the measurable over the meaningful. But it is important to approach these parallels with care. The Gnostic texts were written in a specific historical and cultural context, and they should not be read as if they were describing modern institutions or technologies in literal terms. The danger of treating Gnostic myths as if they were factual descriptions of hidden controllers or secret conspiracies is that it can lead to paranoia, to a sense of victimization, to a belief that awakening is about fighting external enemies rather than transforming oneself from within. This is not the spirit of Gnosis. Gnosis is about seeing clearly, about taking responsibility for one's own inner state, about recognizing that the true battle is not out there in the world, but within the landscape of one's own consciousness. The teaching of the Demiurge's last trap is particularly relevant in this regard. If we read the Gnostic myths literally, we might believe that once we have seen through the illusion of the material world, once we have recognized the Demiurge and the archons for what they are, we have completed the journey. We might believe that we have achieved a special status, that we are among the awakened few, and that the rest of humanity is still trapped in sleep. But this belief is itself a trap. It is the ego claiming ownership of the awakening. It is the spiritual ego asserting its superiority. And it keeps us bound in separation, in judgment, in a subtle form of the very illusion we think we have transcended. True awakening, according to the deeper currents of Gnostic teaching, involves recognizing the divine spark not only in oneself, but in all beings. It involves seeing that the separation between self and other, between awakened and asleep, between spiritual and material, is itself part of the illusion. The ultimate realization is not that I am awake and they are asleep, but that there is no separate I at all, that all apparent separation is a function of the Demiurge's illusion, and that the return to the pleroma is a return to unity, to the recognition that we are all expressions of the same divine source. This recognition has profound ethical implications. If we truly see the divine in all beings, we cannot treat others as less than, as obstacles, as enemies. We cannot use our spiritual insights as a way to distance ourselves from the suffering of the world or to justify indifference to injustice. Instead, awakening calls us to compassion, to engagement, to the difficult work of bringing the light we have, discovered within ourselves, into our relationships, our communities, our world. It calls us to live not in withdrawal from the material realm, but in deeper, more conscious participation in it, informed by the awareness that everything is interconnected, that every action has consequences, that the work of awakening is both personal and collective. This is not to say that the Gnostic path is about social activism or political engagement in the conventional sense. Different spiritual traditions emphasize different aspects of the human journey, and not all paths lead in the same direction. Some people are called to contemplation, to the inner work of meditation and prayer. Others are called to service, to the outer work of healing and justice. And most of us are called to some combination of both, to a life that balances inner transformation with outer expression. The Gnostic tradition, with its focus on inner knowledge and direct experience, tends to emphasize the contemplative dimension. But this contemplation is not an end in itself. It is a means to seeing clearly, to living authentically, to recognizing the truth of who we are and allowing that truth to shape how we move through the world. One of the most beautiful aspects of Gnostic teaching is its insistence that the divine is not distant, not separate, not a being who sits on a throne in the sky, judging and commanding. The true God, the ultimate source, is within. The kingdom of heaven, as Jesus is reported to have said in the Gospel of Thomas, is not coming in some future time or distant place. It is spread out upon the earth, and people do not see it. This is a quintessentially Gnostic insight. The divine reality is here, now, always. The problem is not that it is absent, but that we have been conditioned to look elsewhere, to seek outside ourselves for what can only be found within. The journey of awakening, then, is a journey of turning inward, of learning to see with the inner eye, to hear with the inner ear, to know with the inner knowing that is gnosis. It is a journey of unlearning, of releasing the assumptions and beliefs that have been implanted by culture, by family, by religion, by the voices of the archons that tell us who we are supposed to be. It is a journey of remembering, of reconnecting with the divine spark that has always been there, waiting to be recognized. And yet this journey is not easy. It requires courage, because it means facing the parts of ourselves we have denied or repressed. It requires honesty, because it means acknowledging the ways we have deceived ourselves, the ways we have participated in our own imprisonment. It requires patience, because the work of inner transformation is slow and gradual, unfolding in its own time, not according to our plans or timetables. And it requires humility, because it means recognizing that we do not have all the answers, that the ultimate mystery is beyond our comprehension, that the divine source is infinitely greater than any concept or image we can hold in our minds. This humility is especially important when it comes to the question of the Demiurge and the nature of the material world. In some Gnostic texts, the language used to describe the Demiurge and the archons is harsh, even hostile. They are portrayed as tyrants, as jailers, as forces of darkness and ignorance. And the material world is described as a prison, a place of suffering and death, something to be escaped. This dualistic view, which sharply divides spirit and matter, light and darkness, good and evil, is one of the most controversial aspects of Gnosticism, and it has led to criticisms that Gnostic teaching is life-denying, that it rejects the beauty and goodness of the created world, that it promotes a kind of spiritual escapism. But there are other ways to read these texts, ways that are more nuanced and more in keeping with the symbolic nature of myth. From a symbolic perspective, the Demiurge can be understood not as a literal cosmic villain, but as a representation of the limited, ego-driven consciousness that mistakes itself for the ultimate reality. The archons can be understood not as external beings, but as the patterns of thought and behavior that keep us trapped in ignorance and fear. And the material world can be understood not as inherently evil, but as a realm of experience that is valuable and necessary, even if it is not the ultimate reality. In this reading, the Gnostic teaching is not about rejecting the world, but about seeing it clearly. It is about recognizing that the world of form, of matter, of time and space is real and important, but also limited and impermanent. It is about holding the paradox that we are both spiritual and material, both eternal and temporal, both infinite and finite. And it is about learning to live in this paradox without collapsing it into a simplistic dualism, without choosing one side over the other, but instead embracing the fullness of what it means to be human. This more balanced interpretation of Gnostic teaching is supported by some of the texts themselves. In the Gospel of Thomas, for example, Jesus speaks of making the two one, of uniting the inner and the outer, the above and the below, the male and the female. This is not a call to reject one side in favour of the other, but a call to integration, to wholeness, to the reconciliation of opposites. It is a vision of awakening that does not leave the world behind, but transforms our relationship to it, allowing us to live in the world without being of the world, to engage fully with life without losing touch with the divine source. This integrated vision is also present in the myth of Sophia herself. In some versions of the story, Sophia does not simply abandon the Demiurge and his creation. Instead, she works to redeem it, to infuse it with light, to plant the seeds of gnosis within the beings who have been trapped in ignorance. She becomes, in a sense, the divine presence within the material world, the hidden light that calls the soul back to its source. This is a more hopeful, more life-affirming reading of the Gnostic myth, one that sees the material world not as a mistake to be corrected, but as a work in progress, a process of unfolding in which the divine is gradually being revealed. From this perspective, the journey of awakening is not about escaping the world, but about participating in its transformation. It is about bringing the light of gnosis into the darkness of ignorance, about allowing the divine spark within to illuminate the world around us. It is about living in such a way that our actions, our words, our presence become expressions of the deeper reality we have come to know. This is what it means to awaken not just for ourselves, but for the sake of all beings. And this brings us back to the theme of the Demiurge's last trap. If we understand the Demiurge symbolically as the force within us that clings to control, to identity, to the illusion of separateness, then the last trap is the temptation to hold on to our awakening as a possession, as something that makes us special or superior. It is the temptation to create a new spiritual identity that is just as confining as the old material identity. It is the temptation to say, I have awakened and therefore I am different from, better than, more enlightened than those who have not. This temptation is subtle because it is wrapped in truth. There is a sense in which awakening does change us, does open us to a new way of seeing and being. But the change is not about becoming something we were not before. It is about remembering what we always were. It is about removing the veils, not adding new layers. And the moment we try to claim this awakening as mine, the moment we turn it into a badge of honor or a mark of distinction, we have fallen back into the trap of the ego. We have allowed the Demiurge to reassert his control, this time in the guise of spiritual achievement. The way through this last trap is not to deny the reality of awakening or to minimize its significance. It is to hold it lightly, to recognize it as a gift rather than an achievement, to understand that it is not something we possess, but something we participate in. It is to remain humble, to stay open, to continue questioning and exploring, to recognize that the journey is never finished, that there is always more to learn, more to release, more to discover. It is to resist the temptation to rest in certainty, and instead to embrace the uncertainty, the not knowing, the mystery that lies at the heart of existence. In practical terms, this means that awakening is not a one-time event, but an ongoing practice. It is something we must return to again and again, each time we notice ourselves slipping back into old patterns, into identification with the ego, into the comfortable illusions that make life feel predictable and safe. It means cultivating awareness, paying attention to the movements of the mind, noticing when we are caught in judgment or comparison or fear, and gently bringing ourselves back to the present moment, to the inner light, to the awareness that is beyond thought. This practice of returning, of remembering, is at the heart of many spiritual traditions. In Buddhism, it is called mindfulness, the practice of being present with what is, without judgment or attachment. In Christianity, it is called repentance, which in its original Greek means to change one's mind, to turn away from old ways of thinking and being, and to turn toward the divine. In Gnosticism, it is gnosis itself, the direct knowing that awakens us from the dream of separation and reconnects us with the source. And this practice is not something we do alone. We are supported by teachers, by texts, by communities of fellow seekers. We are supported by the beauty of the natural world, by the love of friends and family, by the moments of grace and insight that come unbidden, reminding us of the deeper reality that underlies all experience. We are supported by the divine spark within, which is always present, always calling us home, even when we have forgotten it is there. The Gnostic vision, for all its emphasis on individual awakening and inner knowing, is ultimately a vision of unity. It is a vision of the soul's return to the pleroma, to the fullness of the divine, where all separation is dissolved, where all illusion is seen through, where the light of gnosis illuminates all things. And this return is not a solitary journey. It is a journey we make together, as we awaken to the recognition that we are not separate beings struggling alone in a hostile universe, but expressions of the one divine source, temporarily experiencing itself through the lens of individuality, learning, growing, and gradually remembering who we truly are. In this sense, the Demiurge's last trap is not just a personal challenge, but a collective one. It is the trap that keeps humanity as a whole locked in patterns of conflict, competition, and separation. It is the trap of nationalism, of tribalism, of ideological rigidity, of any system of thought that divides the world into us and them, good and evil, saved and damned. It is the trap of believing that some people are more valuable than others, that some lives matter more than others, that some groups have the right to dominate and control while others must submit and obey. These are all expressions of the Demiurge's logic, the logic of separation and hierarchy, the logic that denies the fundamental unity of all beings. To see through this trap, both personally and collectively, is to awaken to a new way of being in the world. It is to recognize that the old systems and structures, the old ways of thinking and relating, are no longer serving us. It is to begin the work of building something new, something more aligned with the truth of who we are, something that honors the divine, spark in every being, something that reflects the unity and interconnectedness that is the deeper reality. This work is not easy, and it is not quick. It requires patience, persistence, and a willingness to make mistakes and learn from them. It requires us to face our own shadows, our own complicity in the systems we critique, our own attachments to comfort and security. It requires us to let go of the need to have all the answers, to be right, to be in control. And it requires us to trust in something larger than ourselves, to have faith that the light of Gnosis, once awakened, will guide us forward, even through the darkest and most uncertain times. The Gnostic texts, written nearly 2,000 years ago, could not have anticipated the specific challenges of our modern world. They could not have foreseen the technological revolution, the ecological crisis, the global interconnectedness that defines our age. But the insights they offer are timeless. They speak to the perennial human experience of feeling lost, of searching for meaning, of yearning for a deeper truth. And they offer a path forward, not a path of answers and certainties, but a path of questions and exploration, a path of inner transformation and awakening. As we navigate the complexities of contemporary life, as we struggle with the challenges of our time, the Gnostic vision invites us to look within, to find the divine spark that is our true nature, to remember who we are beyond all the roles and identities we have assumed. It invites us to see through the illusions, not only the obvious illusions of materialism and consumerism, but the subtler illusions of spiritual pride and self-righteousness. It invites us to approach the journey of awakening with humility, with curiosity, with a sense of wonder and openness to the mystery. And it reminds us that awakening is not the end of the journey, but the beginning. It is the moment when we realize that the world is not what we thought it was, that we are not who we thought we were, that everything is more vast, more mysterious, more interconnected than we could have imagined. It is the moment when the question, "Who am I?" opens up into an infinite inquiry, an exploration that has no final answer because the answer is not a concept or a belief, but a living, dynamic reality that unfolds moment by moment, breath by breath, as we learn to live from the place of inner knowing, the place of Gnosis. The Demiurge's last trap, then, is the temptation to close this inquiry, to settle for a final answer, to claim that we have arrived. It is the temptation to turn awakening into a destination rather than a way of being, to turn Gnosis into a possession rather than a participation. And the way through this trap is to keep the inquiry alive, to remain open, to continue questioning, to hold our insights lightly, and to remember that the divine source is always beyond our grasp, always calling us deeper, always inviting us into greater love, greater wisdom, greater union. In the end, the Gnostic teaching is not about rejecting the world or escaping from life. It is about learning to see clearly, to live fully, to love deeply. It is about recognizing the light within and allowing that light to guide us, to illuminate our path, to transform our relationships and our world. It is about waking up from the dream of separation and stepping into the reality of unity, the reality that has always been here, waiting for us to remember. This is the gift of Gnosis, not a set of beliefs to cling to, not a doctrine to defend, not a system to impose on others, but a living experiential knowledge that arises from within, that changes us from the inside out, that opens us to the fullness of what it means to be human and divine at once. It is a gift that is freely offered to all who are willing to receive it, to all who are willing to turn within, to question, to explore, to let go of what is false in order to discover what is true. And as we receive this gift, as we awaken to the light within, we discover that we are not alone. We are part of a vast ancient lineage of seekers who have walked this path before us, who have left behind their teachings, their stories, their myths to guide us on our way. We are part of a living tradition that spans cultures and centuries, that speaks to the deepest longings of the human heart, that offers hope and healing in a world that often feels broken and lost. The Gnostic vision, with all its complexity and paradox, its beauty and its challenge, is a gift to us from those ancient seekers. It is a reminder that the questions we are asking today are not new, that the struggles we are facing have been faced before, and that the light we are seeking has already been found by countless others who have walked this path. We do not have to reinvent the wheel. We can learn from those who came before us. We can draw on their wisdom. We can be inspired by their courage and their commitment to the truth. At the same time, we must also honour our own unique journey, our own experiences, our own insights. The Gnostic texts are not meant to be dogma or scripture in the rigid sense. They are meant to be catalysts, sparks that ignite our own inner flame, guides that point us toward the truth we must discover for ourselves. They invite us to question, to explore, to experiment, to find our own way. They remind us that the path of Gnosis is not about following someone else's map, but about learning to read the landscape of our own consciousness, to navigate the terrain of our own inner world. And so we return to where we began, to the feeling that the world around us is somehow incomplete, that we are living inside a story whose ending we have forgotten. The Gnostic teaching says that this feeling is not a symptom of mental illness or existential despair, but a sign of awakening, a call from the divine spark within, a reminder that we are more than we seem. It says that the sense of incompleteness is real, because the world we see with our ordinary eyes is indeed incomplete, a shadow of a deeper reality, a copy of a higher original. But it also says that we carry within us the key to the mystery, the light that can illuminate the darkness, the gnosis that can dissolve the illusion. The journey from forgetting to remembering, from sleep to awakening, from illusion to truth, is the great adventure of human existence. It is a journey that each of us must make in our own way, in our own time, and it is a journey that is never finished, because the depths of the divine are infinite, the mystery is inexhaustible, the process of awakening unfolds eternally. There is always more to discover, always another layer of illusion to see through, always a deeper level of truth to embrace. The Demiurge's last trap is the belief that we have finished the journey, that we have arrived at the end, that we have achieved the final goal. But there is no final goal, there is only the ongoing dance of awakening and forgetting, of seeing and being blind, of remembering and losing ourselves again in the dream. And the wisdom is not in avoiding the trap altogether, for who among us can claim to have done that? But in recognizing when we have fallen into it, in gently releasing ourselves from its grip, and in returning once again to the practice of awareness, of humility, of openness to the mystery. This is the teaching of the Gnostics, offered not as a command or a creed, but as an invitation, a possibility, a vision of what might be, if we dare to look within, if we dare to question the assumptions that govern our lives, if we dare to remember who we truly are. It is an ancient teaching, but it speaks to us today with renewed urgency, in a world that often feels more illusory than ever, where the line between truth and fiction, between authentic and artificial, between real and virtual, grows ever more blurred. In such a world, the practice of gnosis, of direct inner knowing, becomes not just a spiritual luxury, but a necessity. It becomes the means by which we can navigate the confusion, discern the real from the false, and find our way back to the truth. It becomes the light that guides us through the darkness, the anchor that keeps us grounded when everything around us is shifting and uncertain. And it becomes the source of hope, the assurance that beneath all the chaos and confusion there is a deeper order, a hidden harmony, a divine presence that sustains and upholds all things. The Gnostic vision does not promise that awakening will make life easy or free from suffering. It does not promise that we will escape the challenges and trials of earthly existence. But it does promise that we will see those challenges differently, that we will meet them with greater awareness, greater compassion, greater wisdom, promises that we will no longer be at the mercy of the illusions that once controlled us, that we will no longer be driven by unconscious fears and desires, that we will no longer be imprisoned by false identities and limiting beliefs. And it promises that in the midst of all the uncertainty and impermanence of life, we will have access to something unchanging, something eternal, something that cannot be taken away, the divine spark within, the light of gnosis, the truth of who we are. This is the gift, the promise, and the challenge of the Gnostic path. It is a path that requires everything, our courage, our honesty, our willingness to let go of everything we think we know, and yet it gives us everything in return. the freedom of seeing clearly, the joy of living authentically, the peace of knowing our true nature. It is a path that is both ancient and ever new, both deeply personal and ultimately universal. And it is a path that is open to all who hear the call, who feel the stirring of the divine spark within, who sense that there is more to reality than what appears on the surface. May we all have the courage to answer that call, to embark on the journey of awakening, to face the traps and illusions that stand between us and the truth. May we have the humility to recognize when we have fallen into the Demiurge's last trap, and the grace to release ourselves from it. May we have the wisdom to hold our insights lightly, to remain open to the mystery, to continue growing and learning and deepening throughout our lives. And may we remember always that we are not alone on this journey, that we are supported by the light within, by the wisdom of those who have gone before us, and by the love that underlies all existence, calling us home to the source from which we came and to which we shall return.